You know, sometimes you think you're starting to understand something, and then bam, everything just flips on its head.
Yeah.
That's kind of how it feels with these Punjab farmer protests recently, right? We're hearing about this meeting that seemed like it might actually lead somewhere, some progress. And
Yeah.
then almost as soon as it's over, we hear about these detentions, protest sites getting cleared out. It's a pretty wild turn of events.
It is. It really shows you how complicated these big social movements are.
Yeah,
Just because something looks like it's moving forward in one area doesn't mean everything else just calms down. It's a good reminder that things don't always go in a straight line.
definitely. So that's what we're going to try and unpack today in this deep dive. We're going to break down exactly what happened, who was detained, which borders were cleared, and then we're going to look at the different reactions we've seen. 'Cause let's be honest, there are a lot of opinions flying around about this whole thing. We're going to try to help you make sense of it all using news reports and commentary that's out there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We want to be your guides through this kind of messy situation.
And it's important to remember that what we're seeing now is just a snapshot, right? Things are changing all the time, and they could easily change again. Our goal is to really focus on the most important things that have happened and to understand the different viewpoints that are shaking them.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's start by laying out the timeline. As far as we can tell, two prominent farmer leaders, Sarwan Singh Pandher and Jagjit Singh Dallewal, were detained by police in Mohali. The really interesting thing is the timing of this. It happened right after they had a meeting with a delegation from the central government led by Union Agriculture Minister Shivraj Singh Chouhan. You would think a meeting like that would maybe ease tensions a bit, not lead to detentions.
It's that sudden shift that's so striking, right?
Yeah.
The meeting itself seems like a step towards de-escalation, a willingness to at least talk.
Mm-hmm.
The detentions, though, they suggest a completely different approach, maybe one that's more about control and breaking up the protest.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder what each side was really hoping to get out of that meeting. Yeah.
And it didn't stop there. At the same time, police were clearing the Shambhu and Khanauri borders. These were pretty important locations, right? I mean, these were places where farmers had basically set up camp after they weren't able to march all the way to Delhi. This wasn't just symbolic, these were established protest sites.
Exactly. Clearing those borders directly impacts the farmers' ability to keep up a physical blockade and a visual representation of their protest. It's a move that aims to disrupt their momentum and potentially limit their ability to mobilize in the future.
Now, we should also take a look at what the police are saying. A senior officer in Patiala, Nanak Singh, said that the protesters were warned before they were evicted. He basically said that they had been protesting there for a long time and they were given proper notice before any action was taken.
That idea of a warning is important here.
Yeah.
What did that warning look like? How much time were they given? The details of how that communication happened would help us understand whether the police action was seen as legitimate or as a sudden crackdown.
And then there's this part of the police statement that says some farmers willingly went back home and even got on buses that were provided for them. The statement also said that there wasn't any resistance and that the farmers cooperated well. This all seems a little too perfect considering how intense these protests have been. It makes you wonder if we're getting the whole story.
It's natural to be a little skeptical when a statement makes it sound like everything went so smoothly and everyone was so cooperative when dealing with a situation that's been going on for so long and has been so controversial at times. It's important for you, the listener, to think about whether this narrative really captures what everyone experienced. Were there people who left on their own? Maybe. But was that everyone's response? It seems unlikely given what's at stake for these farmers.
Okay, so let's talk about the political reaction to all of this. The Punjab government, specifically Minister Harpaling Chima, gave their reasons for clearing the borders. The main reason seemed to be that they needed to get traffic moving again. Chima argued that since the farmers' demands are aimed at the central government, the protests should really be happening in Delhi or other places like that instead of disrupting things within Punjab.
In a federal system like India's, where power is shared between the central government and the state governments, there's often tension when protests aimed at the central government have a big impact locally. The Punjab government's position basically highlights their responsibility to keep things running smoothly within the state, even if they sympathize with why the protesters are upset.
But not everyone agreed with that perspective. Congress MP Charanjit Singh Chani had a pretty strong reaction, calling the detentions a direct attack on the farming community. That's a pretty serious word choice. It suggests that there was a deliberate act of aggression against the protesters.
Chani's response is pretty typical of what you see from opposition parties. They're looking for ways to challenge what the government in power is doing. By using strong language, he's trying to rally support for the farmers and criticize the methods used by both the state and maybe even the central government. It's all about framing the story in a way that connects with people who are sympathetic to the farmers' cause.
And Shiromani Akali Dal leader, Daljit Singh Chima, didn't hold back either. He called the actions highly undemocratic and a betrayal of the farm leaders. He wasn't just criticizing what happened, but he was also questioning the basic principles involved and the trust between the government and the farmers.
Using words like undemocratic and betrayal is a big deal politically. They imply that the government is ignoring people's rights and breaking promises, which can really damage the relationship between the government and the people who are protesting. This kind of rhetoric can make things even more tense and make existing divisions worse.
Daljit Singh Chima went even further and made a pretty serious accusation. He suggested that the Union government and the Bhagwant Man-led Punjab government worked together on this whole thing. He even called for all the detained farm leaders to be released immediately.
Accusations of different levels of government working together to shut down protests are really serious and can make people distrust the government. If the central and state governments really did plan this out ahead of time, it would raise some big questions about how much independence the state government really has and about how they're handling dissent.
So we have the situation where, right after a meeting that Union Agriculture Minister Shivraj Singh Chouhan described as very positive, we get these detentions and border clearances. It makes you wonder what positive even means in this case. Was it just a surface-level assessment, or were there real discussions that somehow led to this outcome? It feels like there's a disconnect between what's being said and what's actually happening.
That difference between how the meeting was described and what happened afterward really highlights how complex political communication and negotiation can be positive. Could be talking about the general mood of the meeting or the willingness to engage, but it doesn't necessarily mean there were any concrete agreements or changes in policy. It's a good reminder that official statements often need to be understood in a bigger context.
And maybe the most important thing to take away from all of this is that even with the meeting, the detentions, the clearing of the borders, the farmers' basic demands haven't been met. All of this activity hasn't solved the fundamental problems that started these protests in the first place.
That's a really important point. The immediate actions might change what the protests look like physically, but they don't get to the root of why the farmers are unhappy. Concerns about crop prices, loan burdens, and agricultural policies are still there. This suggests that while the protests might change form, the underlying issues will probably continue to be a source of conflict.
So to sum it all up for you, we've seen a series of events that started with a meeting that looked promising, but quickly led to the detention of important farmer leaders and the dismantling of major protest sites. We've heard the police explanation, the Punjab government's focus on keeping things orderly, and strong criticisms from opposition parties who are saying that these actions were undemocratic and maybe even coordinated. And through all of this, the main complaints of the protesting farmers still haven't been addressed.
What's really interesting to see is how many different interpretations there are of these events. Everyone involved, the government, the opposition, the police, they're all presenting a version of the story that fits their own interests and perspective. This shows how hard it is to really understand complicated situations where information is being filtered through so many different lenses.
And that brings us to a really important question for you to think about. Given all of this, the seemingly positive talks followed by these strong actions, and the fact that the farmers' main demands are still on the table, what do you think the next step in these protests will be? What does this tell us about the relationship between the farmers, the Punjab state government, and the central government? It definitely doesn't feel like this is the end, more like a major turning point in the story. We encourage you to stay informed, really dig into the core issues driving these protests, and critically evaluate the different perspectives you're hearing.
Yeah, it's definitely a story worth following.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Thanks, everyone.
We'll be back soon with more.
See you next time.